Good afternoon, good evening. Hello, everyone from all over the world, and maybe also bonjour who are on the other side of the time frame, or salamat pagi for those who are more in the Asian countries. Hello for the Mutations lecture series. I would like to welcome Andres Lepik. Hello. It is wonderful to have you here. Andres Lepik will give a lecture with the title Small Scale Big Change, 10 Years of Architectures of Social Engagement. He is a director of the Architecture Museum at the Technical University Munich and a professor of architectural history and curatorial practices at the TU Munich in Germany. And he will give us an insight of some developments in this field of architecture. I'm very happy that the fellow, the artist, researcher, designer Maxwell Mutanda decided to invite Andres Lepik for this lecture. The lecture series Mutations is a series which is curated by the researchers, artists and thinkers, curators and scholars from the new program Mutations, a topical new program, a transdisciplinary program of the Akademie Schloss Solitude in cooperation with the KfW Foundation from Frankfurt. And here I would like to welcome Daniela Leikam, my colleague from the KfW Foundation. She will say some words later on. And I would like to shortly introduce you to the group of researchers of this group. First, I would like to introduce you to Sabina Huyoan, media and a sound artist, and Angela Anderson, she's a video artist and researcher. Hi, Grayson Earl, an artist, new media artist, and Ana Maria Gomez Lopez, an artist, writer, and researcher. I would also like to welcome Clara Joe, a video artist, and Joanna Quiroga, visual artist and philosopher. And of course, Maxwell Mutanda, who will guide us through this lecture tonight and will moderate the session later on. You will have the chance to ask some questions. And I would like to introduce you to Rose Field. Rose is a young curator and she's the coordinator of this program. Yeah, and now I wish you a wonderful evening and I would like to hand over to Daniela Leikam. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elke, and welcome also on behalf of the Foundation KfW Stiftung, KfW Foundation. Mondays are lecture days. Welcome and welcome back to those of you who have been joining us in the past weeks already. Yeah, hello to all viewers in front of your screens. Hello to the group of Mutations. Hello to the Solitude team, and first and foremost, or last but not least, a warm welcome to Andres Lepik. Thank you for being with us tonight. So Elke already mentioned it briefly. The lecture series is curated by this group of 7 fellows. The concept behind it is that the fellows invite the guests. So Maxwell Mutanda has invited Andres Lepik to talk with us tonight as part of the interdisciplinary dialogue that we aim to foster here within this program, but also within the lecture series, which is a product and a source of inspiration for the program. Tonight is the 6th lecture already. So we're starting to form a real mosaic of mutations or mutational perspectives. So far, we have been honored by very different contributions, all very inspiring. For example, composer Joanne Kuchera-Morin, culture and media scientist Heather Davis, then anthropologist Evan Kirksey has spoken to us, professor of demography and global health Marcia de Castro was giving her input, and last week also curator Natasha Yenwala. So tonight, as an architect, Andres Lepik will offer us I guess, a spatial angle on the topic of mutations. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more about it. We're also warmly encouraging everyone to ask many questions in the end. Max will give you the in and outs on that, and together with Joanna behind the scenes, will guide you through the night. Thank you to Rose and Joanna behind the scenes, to Maxwell on the scene, and the floor is yours together with Andres Lepik. I'm really looking forward. Enjoy tonight's lecture.
Thank you so much, Daniela. I will love to start by extending my thanks to KfW and Academy for this wonderful opportunity. Just some brief notes. The lecture will be approximately 30 minutes and will be followed by a Q&A session where we invite you to all ask questions. You can ask your questions either by writing them down using the Q&A function. If you'd like to speak your question, please use the raise the hand button at the bottom of your screen, and you will be called upon. You're also welcome to engage in dialogue throughout the presentation using the chat function. The lecture will be recorded and later published on the Mutations group website, as well as the Academy's Vimeo page and the KfW's YouTube page. I am particularly excited to welcome Andres Lepik. The adeptness with which he foregrounds absences and identifies overlooked but necessary critical and bold contributions to architecture is for me an important contribution to the Mutations series. Andres Lepik's main focus is the history and theory of architecture, exhibitions, and contemporary developments in the field of architecture of social change and participatory architectural structures. I'll try not to take too much time reading out his extensive resume. However, a key example of this focus and today's lecture is the 2010 to 2011 exhibition, Small Scale Big Change, New Architectures of Social Engagement, one of a number of exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, where he is formerly a curator of the Architecture and Design Department. I'd also like to direct everyone to the 2013 publication that featured examples from the exhibition Architecture, Building Social Change, which specifically shines a light on built work across the African continent that demonstrates sustainable design and architects practicing beyond the glow of celebrity. Since 2012, he has been the chair of History and Architecture and Curatorial Practices at the Technical University of Munich, and subsequently the director of the Architecture Museum of TU. In this capacity, he has expanded the discourse by privileging architecture beyond so-called global cities, as well as the social dimension of architecture. An example of this is the exhibition African Mobilities. This is not a refugee camp, curated by Paul Matsipa and designed by Ilse Wolf, and the current exhibition, The Architecture Machine, which questions for the first time in the German-speaking world the rudimentary role of computers. I think it's very exciting to consider how we see, talk, and think about architecture, particularly in the changing world. Moreover, through his curatorial position, Andres Lepik highlights that this change is necessary. I will hand over now to Andres.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me and see me. And now I want to share my presentation with you. Let me know if there's any technical trouble. So thank you very much for having me, and thank you for Schloss Solitude and the fellows, and especially thank you, Maxwell, to invite me to this lecture series. I think it's a great honor for me, and I like very much the title and the logo, and I think I wanna build up a little bit on that, on this question of mutations and how did the profession of architecture maybe also mutate in a way in the last couple of, maybe last decade, in a time that I would call a social turn in the discipline. I myself, just to clarify, I'm not an architect. Don't put your expectations too high. I'm an art historian. So, which means that I'm an expert in architecture history, but also see myself more as a independent position. So most of the architects have a clear, let's say, interest in other things than a curator. So in this position as a curator, gives me also the opportunity to think about the role of the discipline of architecture in various ways. What I'm doing as a curator for now over 25 years is doing really researching through exhibitions and communicating the idea of architecture towards a larger audience. And to describe a little bit my way where I'm coming from as a curator, I want to start today with an inspiration that was, let's say, sort of a negative inspiration for me, and it was the exhibition, the seventh Architecture Biennale in Venice in 2000, with the curator of Massimiliano Fuxas, and he put the title up, "Less Aesthetics and More Ethics." And I, at that moment, found it totally wrong. I was really getting let's say, angry about this title, because from my understanding, architecture should add more aesthetics to and more ethics to the global situation, to the global society. But I mean, I don't need to line out or to explain much about the system of architecture in the 1990s and in the 2000s, where star architects were delivering signature buildings all over the world, and the smallest cities, even in Germany, wanted to have their Frank Gehry or Zaha Hadid building. And I thought at that time that something was lost, and it was the dimension, the ethical dimension in architecture. I was appointed as a curator for architecture at the Architecture and Design Department in the Museum of Modern Art in 2007. I had been a curator in Berlin for many years before at the National Gallery in Berlin, and doing exhibitions over there. But with this situation, to become a curator at Museum of Modern Art, a new level of reflection started for myself. And this reflection was mostly about how would I use an institution like the Museum of Modern Art towards another exhibition that might help to understand architecture in a different perspective. And one of the biggest inspirations for me was, after doing some research on the history of architecture exhibitions at MoMA, was the exhibition of 1964 by the curator and activist, I would call him, Bernard Rudowski. And it's the exhibition Architecture Without Architects, an exhibition that came in a moment to the US when the let's say the system of the modernist star architecture system was still alive and kicking, and architects like Mies and Gropius were the star architects of that time. And I found it, doing the research on the exhibition history of MoMA, quite surprising that an architect like Rudowski initiated an exhibition that was turning the system totally on top, and researching what we call nowadays more or less the vernacular architecture. Rudowski called it the non-pedigreed uh, architecture. So buildings that were made by craftsmen, by local experts, sometimes built by anonymous, not always. And I think the title is also a little bit misleading, because many of the 200 projects that Rudowski presented were definitely authorized by someone, but it was a very strong title, and I think it's a title is a genius stroke, and that's I think what I learned from this exhibition was to think about how can architects in the let's say in the 2000s, in this generation of ours, how can they contribute to a new direction in architecture, so apart from this star architecture system? And the exhibition by Rudowski was highly successful. It traveled all over the world, and it had, I think, 38 venues all over the world. And the catalog was one of the, I think it was even the most successful publication MoMA ever published. I think it was published in continuous editions in more than 1.3 million copies. And so as a curator at MoMA, the pressure was on my shoulders. What would be the exhibition that I would propose? What is it that I would take up as a subject? So it was the year 2008 when I presented my idea to the exhibitions committee, which is a group of chief curators, and the director of MoMA, where you, in a monthly meeting, you might ventilate your ideas that you have in mind and then discuss it with your colleagues. And when I came up with this idea, it was exactly the moment when, in fact, the economical crisis had already hit the US very, very strong. And when I proposed this idea of a exhibition on the social impact of architecture, the director, Glenn Lowry, was very, very positive in his reaction, and he found it very timely. So I think in this moment, I could build on a situation and a moment and a small opportunity, a window of opportunity that opened in this moment, because many other exhibitions followed later, also addressing the same questions. So what was the exhibition about? Basically, I wanted to find examples from all over the world that would show realized projects from all over the world that engage with local communities, that bring a social impact into mostly underserved communities. And here is just a quick overview, and I cannot go into the details about the projects that we presented there. And it was from Venezuela to Lebanon, from the 20K house in Auburn in the US to the elemental projects of the incremental housing, to also Los Angeles and Paris. What I want to say is this was the map in the entrance of the exhibition. The selection was made on a set of criteria that I will present to you in a minute. And one of the most important elements of the selection was to not make it a north-south, let's say, pointing at the south as something, as a region where the social architecture should happen, but rather that socially engaged architecture happens already all over the globe. So you see here on this global map, it started from the east to the west, from the west to the east, however you like. And it was really bringing up 12 projects. We selected them from a larger number just to narrow it down to a very focused number. So the criteria, as I said, were clearly formulated. Each of the projects should be realized within the last few years, so we would not allow renderings or utopian ideas. They should be located in underserved areas. It's a wide definition, I know, but it means also that you need to think about what is underserved in a specific region. Each of the projects should be based on intensive and on-site research, respond to specific local conditions, so not being a solution that comes from a drawing table and is not responding to the real needs. Then a very important element was the project should be initiated by the architect and or a community, so not by NGO but really by individuals. And then it should integrate the users, the future users in the planning and construction. I think that's a very important element and factor. And then the next one is the exemplary holistic concept of the whole. So not just solve one issue with a design solution, but really rather address larger dimensions of the local situation. And I think that is the most important one, the excellence in design qualities overall. This is a small view of the exhibition. And when I asked the MoMA carpenters to make very, very simple and economic tables for the presentation, they were laughing at me and they said, like, you mean something like IKEA tables? And I was laughing back. I said, yes, exactly. If you're capable of doing it, please do it. So this is, let's say, maybe one of the few exhibitions in my time when I was working at MoMA that didn't look too much like a MoMA exhibition, but you can't stop them from doing it. At least we presented really a very interesting group of architects that was never seen, that they never saw it themselves as a group. To the audience in the US. And I think that was a major surprise for many. And the reactions were very, very positive. You see here, New York Times in October 14, the first line, architecture is rediscovering its social conscience. And I think it was a major approach and a major success, and it could only happen in this specific moment of time. And using an institution like MoMA, which is highly powerful, and with 3 million visitors per year, you reach out to a really large and broad audience. And how can you then make architecture be seen as a relevant element of the global situation? And I think that exhibition was clearly one, I would say, one exercise for myself to change a focus of my exhibitions, because the exhibitions that I had done before had a different, slightly different focus. With the exhibition came a catalog, and I feel that's very important to point at this, because catalogs sometimes are, as I said before, with the Bernard Rudowski Architecture Without Architecture exhibition, are sometimes another medium of communication for the content of an exhibition. And with this catalog, it was sold more than 7,000 copies alone during the exhibition time of 4 months. And I think that shows that that this exhibition was very well received and had a met a audience. After the MoMA time, I stayed there for 3 years. I quit at MoMA and moved back to Germany. I had the opportunity to work on another publication based on the research that I had done for the MoMA exhibition. So I extended the research on the social element in architecture, and made another publication happen that was called Moderators of Change. And this publication, it's bilingual, was then picking up also more examples from Europe. And I'll give you the captions in a second. I was trying to show in this book that this engagement for local communities, for underserved areas in cities, has happened also in Europe in the last couple of years quite often. And here are the quotes. So there were also examples from Germany and Morocco, from Netherlands and Berlin. So you can see there's quite a wide range of examples, and most of them, as you can see here already, are buildings that are not single family housing, but there are libraries, there are schools or renovations of schools or public gardens that are used for community gardens like the Prinzessinnengarten and so on. So with this book, I think, and the exhibition that I had done before, I catch the attention of two dear colleagues to me of Peter Schmal, a director of the Architecture Museum in Frankfurt, and Dietmar Steiner, who just passed away half a year ago, the former director of the Architecture Center in Vienna. And so they both approached me if it would be possible to make the MoMA exhibition and my extended research available in another exhibition, and we agreed on that. And this exhibition was then presented under the title "Think Global, Build Social." Firstly in Frankfurt in 2013, and second in Vienna. And you can see here an image of the Frankfurt situation. And here we changed a little bit the aesthetics again from the MoMA appearance to a more down-to-earth appearance and a more rough structure, which is addressing the idea of really making this this exhibition also easily transportable. The exhibition in Frankfurt and Vienna was not accompanied by a catalog, but in this case, Anling Go from Archplus was initiating or was asking us whether we could do together a special edition of Archplus, Think Global, Build Social. And this was again another format of expanding with additional research and more essays by really wonderful essays in there to extend the basis of knowledge that we presented in the exhibition. So after this this kind of MoMA experience, after the experience with the Moderators of Change book publication, and then the two exhibitions in Frankfurt and Vienna, I thought now the time is over with this title or with this exhibition topic. But then the Goethe Institute came up to me and asked me whether it would be possible to make it a traveling exhibition. And what I show you here, I don't go into the details. The Goethe Institute and Elke was already like talking to me before we started the lecture here. We were both in the advisory board. The Goethe Institute then decided to do this exhibition and made it happen in two versions, identical versions, the first and second exemplar. And then it traveled from 2015 all over. And the last, because it was totally worn down, the exhibition, they reproduced it in a third version. And then it was just right now, you can see it in Transylvania, in Cluj-Napoca, in Klausenburg. It's still up, this exhibition. So to make this long story short, that was an exhibition that was, I feel, in its content and in its all its venues, a very well received and sustainable production. Now to change to my role in Munich as a curator and now as a director of an architecture museum. When I started in Munich, the big question was there, which exhibition I would start with in my new program for the Architecture Museum, which is hosted in the Pinakothek der Moderne, multidisciplinary building with four collections. Architecture is only one of the four, with the design collection included, the prints and drawings, and the contemporary arts by the Bayerische Staatsgemäldesammlungen. So we are in a building that is very, very like a little bit comparable to MoMA with this multidisciplinary approach. And I decided to take the research that I had done for the MoMA exhibition and focus specifically on the recent developments on the continent, on the sub-Saharan part of the continent of Africa. So my first let's say, major exhibition on this situation in Africa, and this was the map we printed in the catalog. 26 projects, mostly from West Africa, South Africa, and some in East Africa. And it was mostly based on the same criteria that I developed for the exhibition at MoMA. And this was the presentation form. It was a very interactive design for the exhibition. You can see all the yellow stickers and notebooks on the walls. Visitors were here asked to communicate and to comment on the content of the exhibition. We printed a lot of content on the floor, so people had to take their shoes off, and children loved the exhibition because now with the comic designs where we explained the story of each project, there were a lot of questions where children now could understand what architecture could be, what the social role of architecture could be for. Here again, another publication we made along this exhibition, based also on a conference we hosted in Munich. And here again started another line of programming. So from the architecture exhibition, we did another exhibition with Francis Carré, who was featured in the MoMA exhibition already in 2010. This exhibition was done in 2016, and it was his first monographic exhibition he ever had. And I think here in this case, as the main protagonist of an exhibition, I of course asked Francis and his studio to design the exhibition as well, to get the spirit of the architect into the exhibition. And I think it's not the least outcome of this exhibition that Francis Carré was appointed a full tenure professorship at the Technical University in Munich. And I think that was, for me, also very rewarding that this exhibition led to this appointment. Um, I want just to stay a little bit with this line of my research, that then also in a discussion with the colleagues from the Goethe Institute, I decided to turn over the, let's say, the authorship and the let's say the responsibility for the Architecture Museum to a curator from Africa, from Johannesburg, Mpo Matsipa, and she had not organized an exhibition before, so it was a learning experience on both ends. She initiated a series of what she called exchanges, and it was discussion platforms that traveled from Johannesburg to Harare, Cape Town, and other places. I think also Lagos and Cabo Verde. And during all these research platforms that Mpo created, the content of this exhibition was defined, and the exhibition at the end presented in Munich. And I commissioned two architects from Cape Town, so Ilse Wolf and Heinrich Wolf, to do the exhibition design for this exhibition, which turned out to be a great success again. And in this case, it was really the first, I would say, the first exhibition on African architecture outside Africa, curated by an African curator. This idea of the social dimension in architecture is, I'm still following on that, and now widening and sometimes more going deeper into these elements that I had researched for the MoMA exhibition. And one question that I raised with another exhibition quite recently was the question of social infrastructures. And together with the curator, Daniel Talesnik, who's also as teaching with me as an associate professor at the Technical University, he created this exhibition around the question of the architecture infrastructures in Sao Paulo. And it was super interesting in the research process, also with some excursions in a time when we were still able to travel, to build up a team in Sao Paulo and to do this exhibition. And this exhibition is just recently opened in a third venue. The second was the Center for Architecture in New York, and the third venue now in the Swiss Architecture Museum in Basel, and with a totally different architecture design in many parts. But you can see the topic is all and around, and also in Switzerland now well received. So coming to the end of this presentation, and I'm looking forward to all your questions already. So other aspects of the social dimension that I addressed in the MoMA exhibition were also the question: how do we change the system of education of architects? And that was a major insight of myself, that there are very successful programs all around the world called DesignBuild Programs in architecture schools, where students can really address social issues, sometimes on their own, so sometimes together with their their professors, and really start building programs and build these designs as a group themselves, and it's happening all over the world. And with this exhibition, Design, Build, and Architecture, we first time did a global survey on the impact of the design build programs. And on the left, you can see, I think, one of the most successful uh, impacts of the design build program at the Technical University in Munich. It's a it's a health facility in Cameroon, and I think this is quite unusual that students as a group, together with some local craftsmen, are really able to build a full hospital within a couple of months. And I think that is that plays back to the self-estimation of these young students in architecture about their goal for their futures in their profession. So where are we heading now? We are heading with the museum towards another, I think, very important topic. And you see here in the title, it's a topic that is makes some of my architecture colleagues in the faculty quite uncomfortable, but I feel it's necessary to make them uncomfortable, because homelessness, and this is the topic that we want to talk about in the fall. So starting in November, this exhibition, homelessness is an issue that has hardly been addressed by architecture schools in the last years, but is an issue that is raising in the last years dramatically, and raising also dramatically during the Corona crisis. So where do you go when you don't have a home, and why would architects care? And this exhibition will show that there's a lot as a group, and it's also worldwide. There's architects who are taking up this question and formulating not solutions, but that's a word is much too big, because homelessness cannot be solved, but it can be addressed, and it can be let's say, can be formulated, there can be solutions formulated through architecture to design proposals. And this is what we're doing. We are building up a network of 8 cities experts all over the world, from Shanghai to New York to Los Angeles, and also South America, to show what are the different situations and how can architecture contribute to change these situations. So this is where we're heading to. I know that you have a lot of questions now, and I'm looking very much forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andreas. That was a wonderful sort of microcosm. Um, we already have a hand up, so let's go to the 2 attendees. I just need to find them. We'll start with Angela, or let's start with Alka. Okay, are you ready?
Yeah, now, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Andres. That was amazing and wonderful to have like all this range of, and this, let's say, also like red thread through your work. I would love to ask a very little question. Can you give an example how architecture can help in this situation where homelessness will increase? I know, for example, here in Stuttgart, we also have really a big problem with the increasing numbers of homelessness people. But how can architecture help in this situation?
I mean, architects are experts for space and for distribution of space. And I think in a city like Tokyo, with our research team over there, we found out there's 1.2 million apartments are empty. And I think already this is a question this is already like an information that helps to address the question. And architects can take up these numbers and then maybe find out the solutions. And I mean not solutions, but like to show politicians where where they can change the politics of. And I think one more practical solution is, for example, here in Germany, in Düsseldorf, they had a that's how do you call it? Notunterkunft, an emergency shelter that was really very, very bad and considered like inequality and in the construction. And the Düsseldorf just recently decided to hand over to a major architecture firm in Düsseldorf the redesign of this building, and they built a completely new building with the highest quality. And now this building is considered to be of like a kind of an architecture beautifully building in the city. And the residents now still homeless understand now that their situation has been like changed alone through the quality of the design of the redesign of their building. And there are some other cities like London and also in Los Angeles where architects are now finding sometimes lots in a city that are not so attractive for developers and for other uses, and developing beautiful designed buildings in these, let's say, leftover parts of a city. And all of a sudden it turns out these beautifully designed projects become an attraction, or let's say at least looking good, and pay back to the self reward of the people who live in there, sometimes only for temporary time, sometimes also for longer. And yeah, we will show about 30 to 40 projects all over the world, and each city has a different question, and we show different answers to these questions. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Angela, if you'd like to answer.
Yeah.
Ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Hi. Thanks, Andres, for your talk. I have a similar question to Elke, because I guess it's about property relations and the relation to architecture. Because I have to admit, I sometimes joke, I love architecture and design, I have to say, but I sometimes joke that architecture is something that rich people do to poor people. And so I just would love to hear your thoughts about this, because I just looking at Berlin, where it's become it's an object for investors. It's about making money, and now what just happened with the rent cap, and I mean many people are scared of being evicted. I mean the homeless people could be people like me. So I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts about this and how architects could address this, or if they would, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't want to go too much into the details of the homelessness exhibition, but I mean through the research we found out that sometimes it's not even clear. Sometimes the cities don't know about the real numbers. I mean that's the most shocking. That was the most shocking part of it. That some cities they don't even count, or they don't know, so they have no official statistics. And in Berlin, I know the situation is quite complex, but there's a lot of initiatives to really change the situation, and I think architects can contribute in like in proposing a different way of addressing it. I mean, it's not a solution to exclude homeless from the streets and to push them out in the outer boundaries of the city, just to make them out, to chase them out of the visibility. And I think this is a moment where architects come in this also in the design phase and in the phase for public spaces. Take for example the design of public benches. In some cities, they decided to have only benches where the middle is cut off with a like something, so that the homeless cannot sleep on the bench. I mean, this is where an architect can step in a jury and say, no, we don't want benches where nobody can sleep. I mean, this is these minimal elements, and it starts from there, and it goes up to architects like Alexander Hagner from Vienna, who proposed a dilapidated ruin in the first sector of Vienna to restore it to a major investor. The investor had always given money to a foundation for homeless, and in this case the architect approached the investor and said, like, why don't you give your money and renovate this building in the center of Vienna and make it a home for homeless and students, as a kind of a joint effort. And it's the so-called Vinci-Rast in Vienna, and it's a huge success. And the solution was initiated by the architect, and it was then of course it needed some money by an investor. The big money has to step in somehow, but it changed the perception of homeless, because now they are having an address within the city center. I think this makes a difference. I hope this helps you to answer your question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for that question, Angela. Anna Maria has asked a question in the Q&A, which I will read out. She says, thank you, Andreas, for your presentation. I cannot help but ask about your most recent project around homelessness, and specifically where you are working in Latin America. Being originally from Colombia, I'm very curious how you define homelessness in the Latin American context. Homelessness is the result of long-standing structural violence in urban communities, but often the result of country-to-city migration resulting from social, economic disparities, but also through internal displacement and refugees due to armed conflict and violence. Could you share where you will be working in Latin America, but also your thoughts about the difference between homelessness in this context when compared to the US and Europe?
Yeah, thank you. I see the topic of the homeless is quite the core of our discussion now. It is Sao Paulo, of course, again, because we have a network of experts there, and the definition will change. We will give for each of the cities from New York, Los Angeles, Sao Paulo, Moscow, and for each city we'll give a local profile. So what is the situation? Where do we get the numbers from? And what is the local definition? Or what is it? What do the local experts say? And in Latin America, of course, it's quite a different situation to, let's say, to Los Angeles. But still, there is people we will consider to be homeless because they have no permanent address, no permanent residency. They have not. They're moving around. They're not maybe I mean, in America, the definition is the so-called rough sleepers. So people really living on the street and don't even have any other shelter. And I mean, we will give a full definition for each city and define the situation, and then define which kind of solutions or like approaches are available in these cities. So I cannot go into the details here, please understand, because that would require a full lecture. And I'm happy to come back to Solitude and give a lecture only on our exhibition that's coming in November.
I will try and steer it around, but I think it's a testament to this ability that you have of holding up a mirror, say, to the profession and the practice of architecture, that has really created this interesting conversation. I dropped into the chat the Brooks Scarpa development in Los Angeles, which looked at particularly homeless veterans, and then also interestingly in Paris, wherein each arrondissement is obligated to have a homeless shelter, but in Bois de Boulogne, they burnt it down. So, I mean, there's a lot, I think, that, you know, as you said, of onus on the architects, and the mirror has to be held up to them. But my question to you is really this: how did you find yourself in this positioning of really probing? There's a sort of gentle prodding with each iteration of your practice, which I think is important and essential. But how did you come to this point where you almost saw these gaps?
I think it was really this this ongoing experience with exhibitions that I had since the 1990s. Architecture exhibitions, where most of the exhibitions were either a self-promotion for certain architecture offices or ideas, or were highly complicated. I mean, how complicated the intellectual debates, but I found that somehow the profession had sort of left the in many parts the direct contact with the global controversies that were approaching. And I mean, I found from the 1990s and early 2000s on, I found some architects so fascinating, like also Teddy Cruz and von der Forman, researching this imbalance of powers in space and this kind of north-south dialogues, and I found it interesting, and I wanted to change these ideas into something that also the wider audience can understand what is the role, or what is the new role of architects in the future, confronting these global issues. And I mean, maybe I'm very practical, but I think a good idea crystallizes itself in a good real project, and it's not a book, but it's really maybe a building, and you can especially when you do the follow-up of buildings, for example the buildings by Francis Quéré in Burkina Faso. I mean, he builds there now since 15 years, and I've visited his buildings many times now, and you can see that it's not about the first image, it's about how one building after the other creates something like a change that is visible over the years, and it's not about this opening image that you mostly see from architects' offices. So this is where it comes from, and it's where I find it also fascinating to see the different dimensions. Wherever I start with a new exhibition idea, I see there's another topic coming up next to it.
Wonderful, thank you. Joanna has her hand raised. Joanna, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hello, Andres. I would like to ask you, I'll try to arrange my question. Let's see. With your topics, at least with the ones you presented here with your works, and very related to an architecture without architecture somehow. But then all the works to come to you at some point, it has to have the filter of an architect. And but these projects are done in places where the people that probably will be using it or doing it or living in it, they probably won't, I don't know, at least coming from a reality like a Brazil, it's less likely that they will be architects. But on the other hand, self-constructing is very, very popular in places like in Brazil. For example, places like favelas, they are all self-constructed. So these are people, this is architecture without architecture, but they are not officially recognized architectures. So I'd like to hear from you, from your work. What are your tools, your intentions to hear those people, these real life architectures? Because I think it's your goal in the end, but how do you listen to those people? And I think it's also a question of your homeless project. How will you listen to them, not through the architects?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's a very, very complex question, and specifically the situation of the informal building sector, which is at the moment maybe 50-60% of the global building activities is informal, which we would call informal because it's not involving a professional planning and professional guidance by an architect. But with this development, you can easily also see the extreme risks that are coming with this informal settlements. I mean, if you go to Colombia or if you go to also in Brazil, the risks that the populations who are without knowledge and without guidance are building themselves their houses, they are at the highest risk of dying. Also with let's say major floodings or with also earthquakes. And I think this is a major moment where architects have also to step in. Like my friend and colleague Christian Wertmann, he's a landscape architect who is for many years now is working in Colombia and also working in preventing the wrong informal settlement. So it's not to say to tell the people what they should build, but where to not build, because they're risking their lives, and also to make and he's already in touch, very closely in touch with the local governments to really install let's say wherever you can't stop people from building informal settlements, at least to guide them to not build in certain areas where it's highly dangerous and risky. So I think this is also where the architects come in and the experts come in, that at least to start let's say a prevention or preventional steps to give some guidance. And I think this is a changing role of architects, and I feel that's something that we'll have to learn, that architects not any longer sitting at home and designing beautiful objects, but they need to go out and to talk to the communities and feel and learn about the local issues to really respond to them. And it's a long lasting engagement that they have to do, and it's not easy, of course, for them.
Okay, thank you. We've got 2 more questions in the Q&A, if you don't mind us just asking those. But I think just to go on from Joanna's point, I think this the elementals incremental housing really comes to mind, wherein the architect leaves space for the user to then also determine their own space for themselves. So we have a question here from an attendee who says, "Thank you for your talk. Would you share some of your findings or details that came from your design build work? I'm particularly curious about the difference between architecture and design processes generated through education versus what has become standard design build practice in industry work, which I generally find quite different. I'm an architect who has worked on design build projects. How do your findings relate to community-oriented work?"
Yeah, I think the design build program, the design build exhibition was also a very steep learning curve for me and for my team, because we learned there's really a set of very very strong controversies about let's say students from Europe traveling to Africa or to the south and in doing like social engaged architecture with design build projects. And this was kind of this criticism of social tourism, activism, social activism tourism. I think that is one reason that we had to reconsider it. But at the same time, there had also examples in there from rural studio in Alabama, where the poverty rate is 40%, and this rural studio is really highly active, and since now more than 20 years, to really continuously with the students go out in the local neighborhoods and really change it. And I mean, it's a question that is, I think, is very difficult to answer because there's so many also very good examples like Rural Studio, and there's also a lot of bad examples where projects with students completely failed, and it was then leading also to a bigger frustration of the students, because they were finding out that the local situation was really bad and they could not communicate well, and maybe sometimes it was not what they expected, and at the end they came back and were, I mean, I talked to students in Munich, they were totally frustrated. But it's working on both ends. And I mean, it's the same thing like with real architecture. Sometimes an architect has the same experience with like a normal single family house that he fails.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And I think it was important to really focus on something like Rural Studio as a practice, also as a space for teaching and learning that really looks in at its community to sort of say what is the advantage for students. Like, what does one teach students in rural Alabama? It cannot be the same as what someone learns in, say, a Princeton or a Yale. Because what is the benefit? I will go quickly now to possibly our last question from Daniela Laken, who asks, can architects learn something from self-build architecture that is set up or built out of an immediate social need or function? She goes on to say, or the other way around, what could they learn?
I mean, I can answer that with the work of Francis Carey. I think Francis is one of the best examples for this whole social turn that I described or tried to describe through the exhibition, through the publications. I think he was born in one of the poorest neighborhoods or poorest countries in the world, in Burkina Faso, and he learned from growing up there, that working with clay and that working with the local materials was the solution to, let's say, how the poorest people can build their own houses and build something. And when he then got his training as a professional architect in Germany, he made his diploma in Berlin at the Technical University. He transferred this knowledge back into the local context. So he kind of improved the technology to make it lasting longer, so that it becomes even more sustainable to build with clay. And I mean, for his family or for his tribe, this change was a kind of a surprise. One was the surprise that he changed the clay technology at all, and the second was that he didn't come with fired bricks or with concrete or steel and glass. So they were in the beginning they were quite disappointed. But when he, after his first work after the elementary school in Gando, when he won the Aga Khan Award for architecture, kind of this was then seen also within his country, that now he achieved something that others could never achieve, to achieve one of the highest awards in architecture. And it was already like in 2004 that he got this award. And I think this was a game changer on both sides, so that the local communities, sometimes you have to listen and to know very well what is the situation, and then change maybe things step by step. And it cannot go from top down, but it can go with local training. And I mean, it helps a lot, of course, that Francis could work with his, let's say, his clan or with his family. And I mean, it's much better, and it helped him a lot to achieve this success. And it's easier for him than, let's say, for any other European architect coming there and trying to do the same. That would maybe hardly possible. But I think it gives also hope because when I came to the UIA, the World Architecture Conference in Durban 8 years ago, when Francis gave a keynote lecture, it was 3,000 people there in a stadium, and they were now seeing him as a guiding, as a leading architect from the continent. I think this is where I feel this change can happen, and I mean, it's not about him as a person, but it's him as being a representative of a different approach in the discipline. And I think this is maybe describes it better, because it's always it refers to a person who is like starting these changes, and it needs a professional trained architect to do it.
Well, I think that's wonderful. Really seeing him as a conduit for these sort of indigenous knowledge practices to gain value. And I think Alka would love to end us off. So I'll ask her to unmute if she can.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I think that was really fantastic, because I think, as you found out, you started your lecture with the introduction of that we somehow experience a mutation inside of the discipline in architecture with the social turn. And I think it's quite interesting that you also mentioned people like Francis Quéré. It would be very, very interesting to have a follow-up also with the new generation, also female architects, especially on the continent, which who are quite interesting. And I think it would be very, very interesting. And I would like to take your offer and invite you for another lecture, because I think—
Accepted.
Yes, no, really, thank you so much, Anders, because I think this, as you found out, I mean, this homelessness, you are always putting your finger on the wound, you know, as you started your work already more than 10 years ago. And how can the Europeans learn from informal architecture? As Joanna asked you, the self-organized buildings, the informal settlements, and so on and so forth. And later on, you were asking this most important question: what can we learn from the different forms of mobilities? You know, mobility is a very typical thing of human beings, and what can we learn out of this? And also the homelessness question, you know, homelessness can be self-chosen, and mostly it's a forced form of living. But what is needed, you know? And I would like to ask, maybe it's the last question, but I would like really to ask you, what is needed to implement this kind of knowledge into political structures, into decision-making processes? Because, as you said, the social turn can be a mutation, but does the social turn really has an impact on city planning, on official city planning, on architecture, and so on and so forth? So what is needed to really become reality, you know, this mutational act, what's going on in the architecture sphere?
Thank you, Alka. That's a brilliant question for the end, because I think we need all together. We need to work on both ends. Like on one end to really make the wider public and audience aware of the importance and the relevance of architecture, and that architecture is not an elitist discipline, but it's a discipline that addresses the whole humanity, the whole society, the global society in this moment of global really dangers from all the sides. And on the other side, what you're asking, how can we change also the political awareness towards the social turn in architecture? I think a first step is already, you can see, I mean, look at the Pritzker Prize now, that has changed the last years quite a lot. I mean, Alejandro Aravena, who was in the Small Scale Big Change show, and now Lacaton Vissal received it now, and Aravena is now in the jury. So you can see the major awards, and I think this is something where the politicians also look to. They are also changing now towards, and it's a slow process. But I think politicians are always looking for voters and for majorities. So I think we really need to address this question on many ends, also within the discipline itself, in the education of architects. And I mean, that's what I'm trying to do, really, to show the students that their profession is changing, and they should change also quickly into a different direction, and consider themselves not any longer what maybe the role model was 10 years or 15 years ago. I hope this helps a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's really also wonderful, because it's a very central thing, the educational aspect. And if you start from this kind of generations of students and bringing the social question as the central question, architecture will change completely. That's so true.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Wonderful.
I'm
No,
looking
thank you
forward
very,
to
very
welcome
much.
you back.
I hope it can come soon. Thank you.